Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome to Books That Make You. I'm Desiree Duffy, your host, and today we're talking about books that make you immerse yourself in a Tolkien-level fantasy world. Nothing gets our imaginations going like living in a fantasy world that feels so real. You know the locations, the societies, cultures, the landscape, as well as, or maybe even better than real world geography. Enter the Vorelian Saga with author C D McKenna. Now, her world is a dark epic fantasy with anti-heroes and some morally gray characters. It's an award-winning saga, highly acclaimed with readers from around the world. The Blood of the Lion is the debut to this 9-book saga, with readers describing the world building as Tolkien-level, with many others relating this to Game of Thrones. Now, CD Chelsea is a coffee lover like myself, and she lives in the mountains of Colorado. And she is not writing with her dog on her lap. Love that. She's outside enjoying the fresh air and hiking to distant worlds right in her own backyard. Okay, Chelsea, I want your life. You get to live and write in the mountains, and you have a dog, and I just want to be you when I grow up. Welcome to the show, Chelsea.
Thank you so much. What an epic intro. Desiree, I got to admit, I'm super excited for today. And I'm more excited to have this discussion with you, get to connect with you, get to connect with the audience, all of that, and just talk fantasy because that's my love language.
I hear you. And I just, let's start with the world building and the fact that you've just crafted and created something that is on par with some of the great fantasy writers. And pardon me, because we talked about it right before we went on the air, and I think I still butchered the name of your series. Could you please say it for the audience?
The Vorelian Saga.
Vorelian. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. If there's a word for me to butcher, I will do it every time. But tell me, please, what is going on in the saga? Can you describe your world for us?
Oh gosh, the world is ever expanding. Even as I write the 3rd book, and I was just working on it this morning, I'm realizing, holy crap, the world is about to get bigger. More world building, more elements, more mythological creatures being introduced, all of that. I always say, if you can name a fantasy element, it's probably in my book. And that is something that was always really important to me, was just no boundaries. It's your world. You can do anything you want with it. You can put anything you want in it. And don't put yourself in a box and say, oh, well, it's just dragons, or, well, it's just assassins, or just a little bit of magic. And don't, not wanting to blend and play with different elements, all of that. So yeah, I always say, if you name it, it's in my book.
Can you talk about the importance of staying true to real epic high fantasy, and even explain a little bit what that means for the audience, for the readers?
Absolutely. What was always really important to me, and I think a lot of us readers can relate to, is growing up immersing yourself in these mega fantasy worlds that just took you away while you were doing middle school or high school, or any of that, and you're studying for an exam, but you pick up a book afterwards and it's a 7-book series, 8-book series, 9-book, or it's 1,000 pages, and it's a world so grand that it really does feel like reality. You know it better than your own world. You said that earlier, and it was so true. And I always knew that going into my own writing, I wanted something like that. I wanted no strings attached. I wanted to create a world so big that readers got lost in it. And so that was how the Vorelian Saga was born. It's 4 maps. I mean, it is a true world where you have countries, kings and queens, politics, religion, all of that, and multiple realms. I have 3 realms right now: the living, the dead, another realm that we're exploring in the 3rd book, all of that. And it's just so cool to see it get bigger and bigger. And now you did ask, what is the difference between like epic, high, staying true to that? And for me, when I was researching this and figuring out what am I writing, I wrote this book, the first book, The Blood of the Lion, and had really no idea how to label it because I didn't want to go into it making assumptions that this is how it's going to be. It's this genre. This is what it is. So I was researching it. And so epic fantasy is very plot driven, this big theme that's going on in the world of your fantasy book. And it's driving these characters to react a certain way. Now, high fantasy is very character driven. You have all these elements going on in your world, but these characters are kind of making the decisions and they're kind of creating the problem. And so it's kind of a blend of those in the Vorelian Saga. And staying true to that really came down to letting the world breathe. It sounds so simple, so cliche, but that was the truth. I think a lot of these books you read today are everything happens in the first book. And frankly, classic fantasy doesn't work like that. It's very introducing the world one piece at a time, getting a slice of that pie, and then going, I got to go back for seconds, and then realizing it tastes even better going back. So that was always when I was working through the editing process, was letting the world breathe in book 1, introducing you to these characters, letting you get such a deep taste of this world without overexposing you, and so that it's not information dumping, and then setting you up for a bigger and bigger and bigger plot that is going to unravel. So that's very important to me. So obviously that's where 9 books showed up.
Yeah. Now, okay, I do want to get into how you've potentially plan this, your Bible, however you're doing that. But I'm curious too, because when I do think of the worlds and the maps, and maps play so big in fantasy novels, and you will sit there, or at least I will sit there, especially after reading it, then it's like, wait, I need to visualize spatially where these places are. And I even think we mentioned Game of Thrones, even in the TV series, the map and the relationship that the characters' domains, the different areas had to each other really played into it. So I just want to ask, with your world, is it similar to that? You kind of started mapping it out and then it just built from there?
I always knew when I created the saga, I wanted multiple countries. I didn't want it all happening in one country. And so that was, but I didn't have all the answers. I knew I mapped out the first country, Sorel, and then I mapped out the second country, Daira, which are kind of like sister countries, because I knew that was where the first book was going to take place. You had multiple characters on different sides of the world. And I knew that was going to happen, but I had these references, right? You'll read in the first book, references to the northern country, the southern country, and certain families. And you're like, who are these people? But I didn't quite know how it was all going to be geographically like related at that point. I could see it, and I didn't really map it out until the second book. And then I started building out that this northern country, the southern country, because the second book takes place in the northern country. So I was like, kind of got to know where I'm going. So that's why I always say the world's getting bigger and bigger every time I write the books, because certain things don't come to me until I'm actually writing the book. During development editing process for the first book, created a whole religion, a subderivative of the main religion. And I was like, oh, I better make notes of that because that's going to come up later. Yeah.
And I got to imagine it was fun, especially there's a mountain range here, there's a river here. In a way, you had to learn a little bit about typography and terrain and how it interacts. That
Oh
had to be
yeah.
fun.
Oh yeah. And that's so funny you say that, because when I was very, very young, one of my favorite things, and I think a lot of us can relate to, is I was obsessed with weather. I was obsessed with how geography and topography related with weather patterns, all of that. And I was the girl that was like, I don't want to watch any cartoon or anything. I want to watch a documentary on tornadoes. And so that's how I was raised. And it was so much fun taking years of just passion and fun and being able to put it into world building these maps, and having an illustrator come through and bring it visually to life and saying, okay, no, I want the mountains over there. I need this cliff drop here, because I'm thinking, okay, the weather pattern, how's it going to work? Like my brain is minute details that probably the readers aren't thinking about, but I am.
Well, that's part of, when you're building a world, when you're an author.
Yeah.
I say this tongue in cheek, but it's true. You're playing God. You are God. So God has
Truly.
a lot of stuff figured out that maybe the folks, the readers or the characters, they don't necessarily think of and know, but God has a plan, right?
Right.
As they say.
Right, as they say. And I promise I somewhat know what I'm doing in the third and the fourth book moving forward.
All right, so let's talk brass tacks, because I'm curious, like, how are you doing this, especially with 9 books? Do you have a Bible that you've created? Have you created an actual book of your books, or are you doing things digitally? Do you have a tack board with notes all over the place? How are you doing this?
It's everything. So behind me, and I don't even know, but behind me, there's actually one of my maps hanging up, and it's my world. Vorelian world is in my face every day I wake up, wherever I go. I have a tack board. I have notebooks. I've got maybe 6 notebooks and counting that are just outlines and notes for world building, all of that. And then I've got digital records where I've built out more of as you can say, like a Bible almost, of these world building elements that I'm printing and then putting into binders that are categorized, because I have a little bit of an OCD side to me, and I like to be organized, especially as this world gets bigger. But when it comes to the actual writing process, I use my laptop, and I sit there and just open up a Word manuscript and go to the character I want to type and just let it go. And then as the world building gets bigger, then I go, oh, make a note in my notebook really quick. Like this big. And then I come back to it like 3 months later and go, oh, what was I trying to say? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I imagine too with your characters, and you mentioned, you build a religion, you need rules for these things, you need rules for the society. So an author of a one and done type of a book, I mean, it's one thing to create a character, but it's totally different when you're creating the characterizations of a culture, a society. Why is that their religion? Is it because they live next to this mountain and they feel it's the mountain gods? Or so, oh my goodness, that has to be such.
Yeah. I love it. I always say the world is constantly living in my head. And to the point where, and I was actually just talking to somebody about this who is branching out in their own world building in a paranormal fantasy setting. And they were like, how do you remember everything? Like, because they've read my books, we've talked, she's an author herself. She's like, how do you do this? She's like, I'm struggling with just the second book and my world's nowhere near as big as yours. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I have like a memory of an elephant when it comes to my Vorelian world. I think about it and it stays there. And I will rip out a fact months and months later after creating it on the whim. And it's very strange. And it could be just my memory. I don't know. So
that's dedication. I admire that. That's amazing that you do.
It just shows up.
Yeah. Are you pulling from anything that we have in our world? Tolkien, all writers to some degree are pulling from our society, from what's going on in the world, from, the conflicts that exist. Are you doing something similar with yours?
I can definitely say no. I always wrote the books in as a form of escape. I guess a lot of writers could probably relate to that. And I never wanted it to relate to necessarily anything. This is separate from fantasy, actually, right? Tolkien, Game of Thrones, all of that. And I wrote the book in complete lockdown, if you want full transparency there, when we were in that big C word. And I was completely separate from the world, isolated. I wrote the book and I came out and we did the editing process and we released it. And that's when a lot of readers started coming forward and saying, whoa, this reminds me of Tolkien. This reminds me of Game of Thrones. This reminds me of even Eragon. Like all these relationships, these major themes, these world building elements. And that was really, really rewarding for me because I wrote the book without any outside influence, you could say. And going into it, I went, oh, maybe I do have something, that imposter syndrome always sitting on the back of your head. You're kind of thinking about, and you're trying to tell it to behave itself and go sit back down. But every now and then it rears its head. And so, yeah, when I was writing the book, no outside influence, wasn't even thinking about any of that. In fact, in full transparency, confessions here, I haven't actually read a fantasy book since writing The Blood of the Lion. And it's not because I don't love fantasy. Obviously, I'm a writer of it. I love the worlds. It's because I'm so engrossed in fantasy that the last thing I want to do is pick up a fantasy book when I'm done. So I'm reading other things like horror and thrillers and crime novels and things like that. So, yeah.
That makes sense. And also, I mean, you do have some darker themes as well in your writing. So it makes sense that you're leaning into some of the horror thriller. How do you feel about, kind of pulling in some other genres and being influenced in that way?
I love it. I think every genre has a scope and perspective of writing that we can learn from. They tell the character stories a little bit different. Their plot is just a slight smidge difference that you would not anticipate to see. And the world building might be massively different compared to a fantasy setting, and how plots unravel, how secrets are told, all of this. They take sub themes like betrayal and, enemies to lovers or whatever you want to call it, and they tell it differently. Each genre tells that differently. And I think we all as writers can learn something from that. And so it's really, really fun for me to get into a book that is a genre that I don't write in and think, holy crap, they killed it with that writing. Like they told this tale that was unlike anything you would have ever seen in fantasy. And so, yeah, I do 100%. I love reading that kind of stuff and just the exploration of the human mind.
I want to explore your mind a little bit more because you talk about, and so many writers, let's face it, while we were locked down, while we were sequestered a few years back, it was a time for us to sit and write. It forced us to do this. Can you tell me, Chelsea, what you learned about yourself during that time?
Yeah, that's actually, that's like we could sit here all day and talk about that. So a little background about me is I've written for as long as I can remember. And I was the kid that was wanting notebooks and pencils and pens because I hand wrote my stories when I was like 8 or 9 and 10, 11 and on. When I got to right around that 2019 period, that's when I got mad at myself and didn't know what exactly I wanted to be. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stop writing. I had been writing for at that point, well over a decade. And I put everything aside. 6 months went by. It was the longest I've ever been separated from writing in my entire existence since writing. And then the lockdown happened. And I got furloughed from my job. Obviously we couldn't leave our houses. And I was sitting there unbelievably watching The Lion King live action. And I saw the story unravel in my head where I just saw this one character and his story was so tragic. And I'm like, holy crap. It was so powerful that I was at the store the next day getting a crap ton of notebooks and canvases. And that's where I started world building. So during the process of this lockdown, I know it was such a tragedy for a lot of people, but it ended up being one of the most beautiful things that happened to me. And that's because it really, really forced me to reconsider who I am, what I love, and why is that so important to me, and what it means to me as an individual for my soul if I follow my dreams. And that's exactly what I did. And so I put everything aside, and I put everything I had into this first book, and went through every process where I thought I needed a proper editor. I needed those 3 rounds because I knew I might have been writing for like 14 years at that point, but that didn't mean I could write good. So I went through all that, and it really taught me my confidence. I always tell my editor, and he probably rolls his eyes now because I constantly call him out, but I tell him, I wrote for 14 years and thought I knew what my voice was. But in the editing process, you gave me confidence. And he changed everything for me. He made me realize that this is a passion that I can pursue. And so here we are, a few years later, and now I'm dually published, and I do freelance editing and ghostwriting work and all sorts of things. And I'm constantly engrossed in the bookish community, and it's the most rewarding thing on the planet. So yeah, the lockdown taught me to follow your dreams. That sounds cliche, but it's true.
Thank you for saying that. The bookish community, you and me must have some kind of psychic connection. I actually just wrote an article, and we're going to publish that on our blog about the importance of community for authors, and on 2 fronts, because you're building community of readers, of folks that you want to read your book. Hello, obviously. But like you say, you and your editor become a team, and he brings out something. You start discovering the power of networking with other writers and authors. Can you just more thoughts, if you could, on why you feel the community helps you?
Oh, absolutely. And the bookish community is everybody involved in books, right? I mean, you're either a reader, you're helping the author discover their voice, you're helping bring characters or stories or whatever it is to life for these stories. Because at the end of the day, stories connect us all over the world. Stories connect us. And that is why books and any sort of entertainment with stories is so popular. And so being able to be a part of a community that helps bring those stories to life, that helps connect us on a human level, is so rewarding. I always say my books, it takes an international team. My formatter is in Serbia. He is a rock star. My editor is in America. He's the only guy that I work with in America. My book designer is in Europe somewhere. My map illustrator is in Spain. I mean, it is a global team effort. And that's why it's so cool, because the bookish community is a global community. And so for me, getting together and having all these people help see your vision and say, yeah, let's do it. And being able to sometimes bring it to life and exceed anything you would have ever imagined. It's amazing. When I got into even social media, because I knew if I was going to publish, I had to get into social media and join this bookish community. It's been so rewarding to connect with these people that have either found their voice as a writer, or they're just discovering their voice. And, you get to help them come together and say, hey, you got this. You got this. Like, let me read your work. Talk to me. What is it? What's holding you back? All of that. And then, like I've said, readers all around the world. That's how I've met all my readers. And it's so rewarding when you get to have somebody from Turkey or Belgium or Australia reach out to you and say, your book was so awesome, and I binged it in 3 days. And I cannot wait for the next one. I fell in love with this character. I felt so connected to that character. Again, it comes down to the simple theme: stories connect us all over the world. And so it's really rewarding.
Do your characters ever talk to you? Do you feel that they're there with you?
Yes.
Somebody else. Yeah.
God, they are always in my head. It is so funny because and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but you will see these memes where it's like the side character takes over the plot, and it happens. And these side characters are sometimes the loudest characters in your head. And you're like, yo, okay, like my second book, I had to rewrite an entire main character storyline in order to incorporate the side character more, because they have now taken over and become a primary main character. And they're going to hang out for a long time for the rest of the saga. So yeah, the characters are always, always, always in my head.
That's so fun when that happens.
I love it. It's God.
Yeah. And Chelsea, I hear a lot of authors say very similar things. It's like the characters start telling them what to do. It's like, no, this is what's happening. No, put that outline away because I'm doing this.
And it's the honest truth. So when I outline, it's a very rudimentary, like basic outline just to get from point A to point B to point C. But when I get into the outline or the actual story writing, it's out the window. And the characters, I always say the characters tell me the story, because I might have an idea and we might have a goal ending where we're going to get. But from that point onward to the ending, it is in the character's hands when I'm writing. Certain things happen. And that's what I was doing this morning. I was tweaking my outline because we're already changing and we're only 20,000 words in. I'm like, oh, that's a major change.
And here we go.
Exactly. But it's so much fun. It gives the story so much life. Yeah.
Well, you are an amazing writer, a brilliant talent. Thank you for bringing this to the world. And thank you too, because as I understand it, you are donating some of the proceeds from your books to the Colorado Wolf Sanctuary. Can you talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, I am so passionate about wildlife, wolves in general. They are such an important species in our ecosystem with keeping balance with everything. And I went to the Colorado Wolf Sanctuary a couple of years ago, actually, I think right before the first book was published. And it was one of the most profound experiences in my life. I can still remember I went into a couple of the cages, like the outside setups, and I went into those and had these eye contact moment with these wolves. And it was like 1,000 stories told right in that single moment. So powerful. And so I always knew when the time was right, I wanted to give back and I wanted to do something really, really cool. So the ebooks are on a special deal, and all proceeds actually from those ebooks for the rest of the year, whatever is gathered, goes directly to the Colorado Wolf Sanctuary, because I want to be able to give back. I'm such a giving person, and I'm happiest when I'm able to do that and be able to be a human and say, I'm going to help something, because sanctuaries need help and they need funding and they need resources. And if I can be a part of that, I want to do that.
And so that's a great way too, especially during the holiday season. Buy the books. You can gift the books, read them yourself, and you're helping the wolves, and it all comes full circle. I absolutely applaud that. That's great, Kelsey.
Yeah. No, it's something I've wanted to do, and I knew preparing for the third book's release next year, I thought, what a fantastic opportunity! Now you've got 2 books out. So that's a good binge buy. Mm-hmm. And you can get people to join that empire and still do it for a cause and feel good about it, because yes, why not? Wolves are awesome. They're freaking amazing creatures. I've got the wolf actually behind me that I met. His name is Isha. He hangs up on my wall, and he's an Arctic wolf, and he changed my whole perspective on things. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, this is to Isha.
Thank you, Isha. I love that. Chelsea, okay, so let folks know where they can go to find your book, support the wolves, your website, social media. Share your details.
Okay, let's do it. So I distribute all over the world because I go through both distributors. So you can find me on Amazon. You can find me anywhere like Barnes & Noble, online, Walmart, even bookstores that I don't even know exist show up every now and then because they distribute through Ingram Spark. So just Google it and see if your local bookstore actually carries my book. I have a Library of Congress number, so go to your local library. You can get it that way. But the Amazon and the Ingram Spark distributed ebooks are the ones on sale, and those are obviously the best deal books. But any book you buy, those proceeds are going to the Wolf Sanctuary. But if you're an ebook person, then you get the special deal that way.
Excellent. Chelsea C D McKenna. I want to say CD. That's what people should look for if they're going to Google you.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being with us today on the show. I had a great time talking to you.
I super appreciate you just allowing me on here to talk about fantasy, because fantasy's awesome, and just connect with you and connect with anybody listening. Because this is going to be awesome, and I love just connecting with people from all over the world. So if anybody sees this and is like, dude, I want to chat with her about my own world building, C D McKenna, that's my Instagram handle. You can connect with me over there.
Perfect. And we'll have you come back. I mean, you got 9 books to go. You only got 2 out. So we'll do this a few more times, probably before the end of the series. And then we'll start talking about the next series, right?
I do have a few series in the works already. So it's a never-ending world.
Absolutely amazing. C D McKenna, thank you again for joining us today on the Books That Make You show. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us as well. You can find out more about us on our website. It is booksthatmakeyou.com. We are also on, you're ready for it, we're on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling themselves nowadays. Plus, of course, YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell, get notifications, and you can sign up for our Webby award-winning newsletter so that you never miss news and information about the books that make you shows and authors like CD that make us who we are. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of those books that make you exactly who you are.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.